All right, hi everyone. We should be live on Facebook now. First of all, thank you to all the candidates here tonight for attending. We're going to start out with a quick voter registration training from our VoteCo and Michelle, our VoteCo programs manager. So Michelle, take it away.
Hi everyone, and thank you. So I'll just briefly share my slide. And while I'm doing so, I just want to say a quick thank you for everyone for coming out to this event. Okay, should be shared. Okay, so hi everyone, I'm Michelle Chen. I'm a representative from the UC Berkeley Vote Coalition. We are a nonpartisan department of the ASUC, and we strive to promote voter registration and civic engagement on campus. Now, during the slide, I will be going quite fast, so if you have any questions, feel free to email eavpvotecoalition@asuc.org. Now, I recommend you taking out your phone or having a writing device in case you want push notifications for voting info, for guides, for tips, and to text CAL to 56525 in order to have this push notification and text reminders. So again, that's CAL to 56525. Now, the main website I want to talk about is castudentvote.org. This website not only helps you register to vote, but it also has great resources for voter registration in all states. So if you have any questions, it's a great site to refer to. Now you'll first see this screen, which prompts you to put in your email and your zip code. You then need to put in your full name, not your nickname, and your home address, which might be different from your mailing address. Now your home address is where your vote will be counted, but your mailing address is where your ballot will be sent. So say, for example, you're an out-of-state student from Texas, but you're living in Berkeley. Your home address may be in Texas, but your mailing address may be in Berkeley. So make sure you differentiate the two if it applies. Then put in your date of birth and your phone number, but the phone number is optional. And you can also select to receive emails from the UC Student Association and similar organizations. Now, the following steps depend on whether or not you do or don't have a California driver's license, and I'll give you steps for both. So starting with if you do have a California driver's license, you just need to fill out your qualifications to vote, and then your place of birth and your identification, which will be your license or the last 4 digits of your social security number. You then need to put in your home and mailing address and double check if that is different. And then you'll receive this previous registration part, which will ask if you've registered to vote previously. Now, if you have, fill in as much information as you can, so that way you're not registered to vote twice. For the political party preference, this only impacts your ability to vote in the presidential primary election. So if you mark yourself as no party preference, some, but not all parties will let you request a ballot to vote in their primary. Now, for the vote by mail section, in 2020, everyone will automatically receive a mail-in ballot, but you can check this box if you want to continue voting by mail in the future. And then there's also some questions about if you want some voter info guides. For the accessibility and confirmation part, just select as applicable, and then you'll receive a review stage. Now for if you don't have a California driver's license, you'll do the following. This part's the same, name, home address, mailing address. And then this part is also for both people. So if you have registered to vote previously, if you have a name change, a title change, or an address change, you just fill out this. And then if you don't have a California driver's license, you need to put in the last 4 digits of your social security number. So that's the differentiating part. So some final steps, you'll receive a new tab pop-up from the Secretary of State main page, which you need to print out, sign with black ink, and then mail in. You don't need a postage, but you need to drop it in to the nearest mailbox near you. And then some major dates to keep in mind. On October 19th, that is the California deadline to register to vote. You can register to vote after, which will be a same-day registration, but you need to do it in person at your polling place. So October 5th is when mail-out ballots started to be sent out, and they'll continue to be sent out as long as you register to vote before October 19th. and November 3rd is the big election day. And that's all I have to say. So again, if you have any questions, feel free to email EAVP Vote Coalition at asuc.org. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you, Michelle. Hi, I just would like to welcome everyone to the ASUC 2020 Berkeley Mayoral Town Hall. My name is Laurel Halverson. We're with my co-director, Sam Taplin. We will be moderating this event tonight. Before we continue, we would like to do a quick but also very important land acknowledgement, especially since today is Indigenous Peoples Day. So the Associate Students of the University of California recognizes that Berkeley sits on the territory of Huchechen, the ancestral land of Chochenyo Ohlone, the successors of the historic and sovereign Verona Band of Alameda County. This land was and continues to be of great importance to the Ohlone people. We recognize that every member of the Berkeley community has and continues to benefit from the use and occupation of this land since the institution's founding. So again, thank you all for coming this evening. We're both the local relations directors for the EAVP department and the ASUC, and we're excited to bring you this event and the 3 candidates running to be your next Berkeley mayor. Sam, if you would like to continue, you're also welcome this way.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Laurel. So we're streaming live on Facebook right now and recording this event for future viewing. We'll start the debate with opening statements from each candidate. Then we'll ask each of the candidates a couple questions about their backgrounds. We'll then move into the 3 main sections of the event. The first section will be focused on policing and public safety. The second section will focus on housing and homelessness. In the final section, which we're calling Around Town, will include a mix of different questions about the city. Each of these sections will take around 15 minutes. We're taking audience questions through the Q&A feature. We'll pause between sections to ask them to each of the candidates. But without further ado, let's get to the candidates. Mayor Jesse Ergin, your opening statement, please.
And Sam, how long will we have to make an opening statement?
Oh yeah, 2 minutes for the opening,
Okay.
for each opening statement.
Thank you very much. Well, I want to recognize that we are on Ohlone territory. This was and is Indigenous land. So thank you for that recognition. I want to thank the ASUC for hosting this forum, and students, your voice and your vote matters. The decisions you make in City Hall have a daily impact on your lives here in Berkeley. While some of you may not be in Berkeley right now, may be participating in distance learning, or may be in town, the decisions we make on housing and transportation and public safety affect students on a regular basis. And so I want to encourage you, if you have not registered to vote, to register to vote in Berkeley. If you're registered at your home address, please register in Berkeley because your voice does matter. I actually first got involved in community activism in Berkeley as a student activist. I had come to Berkeley in 2002 to attend UC Berkeley. I was drawn to Berkeley because of its long history of fighting for political activism, fighting for social change, and got involved in the ASUC. It was actually the ASUC City Affairs Director. And the issue at that time was the housing crisis. And that is one of the greatest challenges that we face today. Just like then, students are facing homelessness and housing insecurity, and the cost of housing is unaffordable for many students and many people in our community. So I got involved in fighting to push the university to build more housing close to campus, and then got involved in fighting for rent control and tenants' rights in the Berkeley community. I was elected to the rent board when I was a junior at Cal. I'm the first student to serve as chair of the rent board. And in 2008, I was elected to the Berkeley City Council, the youngest person ever elected, until Rigel Robinson beat that record in 2018. And during my 12 years on the Berkeley City Council, I've been a strong advocate for students, making sure students have a seat at the table, serving on our boards and commissions, and fighting for issues important to students around protecting tenants and building more housing close to campus, public safety, working to amend and repeal the group living accommodation ordinance that was restrictive on Greek life and student life, and also transportation. So look forward to talking about all these issues and look forward to my advocacy on behalf of students.
Thank you, Mayor Ergin. Mr. Xiang, you have 2 minutes as well.
Thanks, and thanks to Aiden and Jesse. I think this might be our last debate, and it's been a lot of fun hanging out with all of you. I wish we could do it in person. After this is all done, we should all grab a beer and talk about how this election unfolded. But, you know, it feels like we keep saying the same thing. So I was thinking about what should I say at the start of this debate? And I thought I'd read a quote from my favorite novel, which is The Brothers Karamazov by Dostoevsky. And I think this is a quote that is instructive about how we can confront some of the challenges Berkeley is facing. And it's this: as a general rule, people, even the wicked, are much more naive and simple-hearted than we suppose, and we ourselves are too. So there's two really important pieces of this quote. One is that even those we think are evil, and I think this even goes for Donald Trump, are more naive and simple-hearted than we might think. That a lot of the things that we attribute to malice actually come from naivete, from simplicity, because at root, we're all driven by these basic emotions: fear, love, desire, survival. You know, all these things we share with other human beings and even animals. But the other thing to point out is that we ourselves are afflicted by these same naive, simple-hearted tendencies too. And so as much as we might think that the folks around us are naive and simple-hearted, maybe the things that motivate us are too. And when we come from that place of humility and come from that place of non-judgment of those around us, we can make a lot of change. When you look at some of the problems our society faces and Berkeley faces right now, things like homelessness, I mean, you can go through all the policy details, and as someone who's been a policy wonk for most of my life, I'd love to geek out on those policy details. But at the end of the day, you can actually get to pretty good solutions just by relying on a simple heart. You think about something like homelessness. Go to one of the encampments on I-80 and ask yourself, just from a very simple-hearted, naive perspective, what's the solution to this? Well, let's house it. You look at climate change and the pollution in our air, or you go to a oil refinery, a natural gas pipeline, or a factory farm, and you ask yourself, what's the solution? And clearly, this sort of place just needs to be shut down. And if we go back to the basics of who we are as human beings, as animals, frankly, then I think we can make a lot of progress. And that's what we're trying to do this campaign. Just get back to some of the basics, find our heart, find our naivete, and recognize that we have the ability to change the world if we get back to those fundamentals.
Thank you. And Mix Hill, you have 2 minutes as well.
Thank you so much for this, and thank you for your voters' education. My name is Aiden Hill. I use they, them pronouns. I'm currently the vice chair of the City of Berkeley Homeless Commission, an active UC Berkeley student, and I recognize that I benefit from Ohlone land. I encourage every member of our community to donate to the Segurite Land Trust to support Indigenous sovereignty. And I'm happy to be endorsed by Councilmember Cheryl Davila, who received the only endorsement from Senator Bernie Sanders, as well as Karina Gould from the Segurite Land Trust. The main reason why I'm running is because we're at a moment in history where the political decisions we make now will affect the rest of our collective history. As humans, we have the ability to protect our commons, the land, the sea, and the air. But we also have the ability for great chaos, such as nuclear weapons, land degradation, and the stain of poverty that denies basic human rights. True equity is out of reach for too many people in the city of Berkeley. Climate change, coronavirus, digital misinformation, they continue to divide us. Our families sacrifice their peace of mind to meet their basic needs, and many residents have fallen through our social safety net, relying on mutual aid to get by. Our leaders, now more than ever, must be willing to fight for our future generations. What distinguishes me from other candidates is I'm deeply rooted in my community. We have a duty as a community of Berkeley to preserve and protect our city for future generations. As the UC Berkeley student running for office this 2020 election cycle, this gives me access to global scholars in climate adaptation and integrative technologies. I will ensure compliance of all open meeting laws and encourage residents' participation in digital and in-person meetings as well. I envision a Berkeley that has alternatives to liquor stores by supporting family and worker-owned cooperative gardens, supporting schools, neighborhood associations, and forming garden to cafeteria programs for schools, hospitals, and mental health facilities. As mayor, I will work to make sure quality childcare is available for all parents, and I will make sure that all contributions to our economy are taken seriously. And I hope to speak more to you about what I would like to bring to Berkeley in the remainder of this debate. Thank you.
Thank you so much, all three, for your opening statements. I would also like to note that after each of our sections tonight, we will give the option for a Q&A function. So the Q&A function is available to all attendees this evening. So if you do have a question directed towards a specific panelist or in general, please feel free to drop it in the chat. We do have one of our panelists that is taking note of each of those, so you are being listened. So I guess we can go right into our background question. This one is when you ran for mayor, Jesse, when you ran for mayor in 2016, you said, "It is estimated there are over 1,000 homeless in our city, and we don't have the services needed to adequately serve this community. This is unacceptable." Last year, the nonprofit Everyone Home estimated there are not 1,108 unhoused people in Berkeley, an increase of 13% from 2 years before. Across Alameda County as a whole, however, the same report found that the number of unhoused people has increased by 43%. How have you lived up to the promises you made voters 4 years ago?
Well, excellent question. We actually have more than the number that the Everyone Home count found, because generally we're not able to count every single person that's on the streets. We have fundamentally transformed our approach to homelessness in Berkeley. Before I came into office, the focus of the previous administration was criminalization and basically providing basic needs services, making it comfortable for you to be homeless, but not really focusing on ending your homelessness. And so we have invested in a housing first approach. We have moved hundreds of homeless people off the streets into permanent housing. We have expanded public health and mental health, housing subsidies and other supportive services for people on our streets. During this COVID emergency, we're not evicting people on our streets. We're letting them shelter in place while we provide them the supportive services and work to get them off the streets into permanent housing. Ultimately, housing is the solution to homelessness. And we don't have enough housing to be able to house the over 1,000 people on our streets. But we are making progress. We have broken ground on projects to build permanent supportive housing. And I'm committed to working with county officials and regional officials to significantly expand the amount of permanent supportive housing to address our homeless crisis.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And just to clarify, for this section, you have 1 minute to respond to each question. This one's also for you, Mayor Arreguín. You graduated from UC Berkeley in 2007. The relationship between the university and the city of Berkeley can be contentious. You, as well as the city, are currently suing the university over increased enrollment, delaying a junior faculty and postdoctoral student housing project. How can you move forward and find common ground in the relationship between the city and the university and center the needs of students?
Well, I have made centering the needs of students a high priority of my time in office. I've initiated a student advisory board, meeting with student leaders on issues and developing action plan about how to address issues like housing and public safety and our response to climate change. Our relationship is complex, but I think it's improved. In 2017, the biggest challenge that we faced were the Trump protests in Berkeley, and we had to work together to keep our campus and our community safe, and we were able to do that successfully. Now, it is correct that we've seen an 11,000 student increase in Berkeley, and what we're asking for is a fair share, while also asking the university to address the impacts of increased enrollment to make lives better for students, to make sure that we have more housing for students, to make sure that we have more instructional support for students, because they did not plan for how to accommodate that significant growth. So I support the campus's plans for more student housing, including housing on People's Park. We are looking at upzoning the South Side area to accommodate more density, more housing, and we want to continue to work in partnership to address our housing crisis.
Thank you, Mayor Arreguín. All right, Mr. Hiswing, this is the next question for you. Again, you will have 1 minute to answer the question. So you are the co-founder and former leader of Direct Action Everywhere, an animal liberation group. Per a recent Berkeley site article, other vegan activists have accused your group of being cult-like, for instance, making members feel guilty if they don't contribute enough to this organization, encouraging them to live in houses with other members, and isolating members from their other friends. In 2016, the SF Beacon Society banned a group from tabling, speaking, or recruiting at the World Vegan Festival, an event they host. Should students be concerned about these allegations?
They should not. That report was categorically false. And when we asked Berkeley side to interview other sources on the record, they refused to interview them. And you can go through and see our response on our website, which we posted on the announcement bar. But the reality is Berkeley side is a publication that's funded with millions of dollars in corporate money. It has worked hand in hand with Jesse over the last couple of years, and they even coordinated the publication of that article with the start of voting, which is very coincidental. And one way to point out that this reporter is not active integrity, we recorded the interview. They only did one interview with me for 1 hour, and I will gladly publish that interview if she gives me the consent to do so. She's refused. But I want to get to the issues because I think that the things that people care about in Berkeley, including students, are not rumors and allegations on the internet. We know there's a massive amount of disinformation on the internet. Anyone can write anything on the internet. But the issues facing students and the people of Berkeley. And when you look at the actual issues facing Berkeley, Berkeley side and the Oregon administration have not been addressing them, which is why instead of addressing the issues like homelessness and climate change that are not being addressed, they deflect and they attack us for personal things that are not actually substantive issues in this campaign. When you actually look at the record of this administration compared to what we can achieve as a city, you'll see that this administration has fallen very far short. Our climate change timeline is 30 years. Homelessness has increased and not decreased, and we can do better. So don't believe everything you read on the internet. Certainly don't believe everything you see from the other campaign.
Thank you, Mr.
Judge for yourself what you think we should be doing.
Another question for you as well, Mr. Shink. In a 2015, Shunk, sorry, I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. In a 2015 article in the Huffington Post, you outlined an animal rights liberation pledge. Refuse to eat animals, refuse to eat at a table where animals are being eaten, ask others to do the same. As a political leader, you would have to sit at a table, figuratively and sometimes literally, with people you vehemently disagree with. If elected, could you compromise and bring people of different backgrounds and views together?
Yeah, I just want to point out that the questions being asked of me have absolutely nothing to do with this campaign or any of the issues in this campaign. I'd like us to talk about the issues, but I'll answer the question nonetheless. There has been an allegation that I'm an animal rights extremist and I can't get along with anyone who's not vegan. The reality is when you look at my record, even as an animal rights activist, I have worked extensively with one of the largest factory farm owners in the nation, Rick Pittman. He's a good friend of mine. If you ever bought Mary's Chicken from Whole Foods or from Berkeley Bowl, this is the owner of the entire company. I sat down, I've broken bread with him. We've worked together to improve the conditions inside his farms. He's acknowledged that there were some failings in his farms that we found through our investigations. I've acknowledged there are some mistakes that we made. And I think my record of collaboration with folks on the other side of the aisle, on the other side of investigation, because we actually actively investigated this guy's farms, shows that I'm willing to talk to people from all stripes, from all backgrounds. And that's what I'll continue to do as mayor. But the reality is, if we're going to make progress as a city and as a nation, we have to make this more systemic. It can't just be about one person's relationship with someone else. It's got to be about the culture we build as a community. And one of the reasons I'm concerned about the way this campaign has gone is because we're not living up to the culture of inclusion, of integrity, and of good faith in the way this campaign's been going.
Thank you. Mix Hill, the next question is for you. As a UC Berkeley student, you've experienced class cancellations for non-payment and housing insecurity. 1 in 10 Berkeley students experience houselessness in their time at the university. How would you use your power as mayor to help vulnerable students?
Thank you for that question. It's been a very difficult road the last 4 years that I've been enrolled in UC Berkeley. I felt like so many things were put against me. The Milo Yiannopoulos rallies that sought to deport my friends, the smog risks and the power outages, and even now coronavirus makes studying very difficult. As a person who has been in the Berkeley community, the first thing I noticed that students benefited from was People's Park. Had I just known from the University of California that People's Park served free meals every single day, every week, Monday through Friday with East Bay Food Not Bombs, many of the struggles I went through could have been alleviated. And that's why I fight so much for that public space, because it was a sanctuary for me when the University of California didn't provide that. I came to Berkeley as an openly queer student, as a person seeking safety from the communities around me across the world. It was supposed to be a refuge for me, but I had to take on this role this leadership position because so many people that I've met have fallen through the cracks. And I blame both the city and the University of California, Berkeley for that. Not only wasn't I provided housing, I wasn't provided mental health support. I wasn't provided adequate nutrition, and so many of my friends had to leave the city because of this. I would change this system because I'm directly affected by it. I would work with residents to make sure students are housed. I
Thank
would
you,
work.
Mix Hill.
Thank you, Mix Hill.
Sorry, we have
Yeah.
to-
No
I gotta
worries.
put a timer up.
This is also another question for you. In your candidate platform on Berkeley's side, you mentioned that you'd like to finance healthcare in Berkeley, including dental, mental, pharmaceutical, chiropractic, vision, a public option at a below market price, and prenatal care. How would you accomplish this given Berkeley's limited resources?
Yes, absolutely. This would be accomplished by creating budget allocations in community health and housing. Right now, the majority of our budget goes to the police department when those same police departments aren't offering the specialties that we need. Instead, I want to form public cooperatives. I want to work with different chiropractic agencies, for example, the Joint Chiropractic on Telegraph Avenue. I want to work with Lifelong Medical Care, who provides dental, mental health insurance, as well as protection against STDs and HIV. These are the things that I'm really trying to focus on. And we need more funding for the Berkeley Free Clinic. They're providing resources out of pocket with limited donations to provide adequate services for the Berkeley community. I think we can do better. I think we can match their goals. And I think that we can actually emphasize a city where people want to live in. These things, lack of vision, lack of mobility, they prevent people from making the quality of life, the true substantiality that Berkeley has to offer. As mayor, I will commit myself to making sure those changes are enacted and people have the resources necessary to live in this world.
Can I just point out that the other candidates were asked about their platform, and I was asked about false personal attacks that are made?
Mr. Xiong, I'm sorry, we're going to move on to policy-driven questions in the next section.
I hear you, but I think people should listen to the New York Times and the Washington Post and not an attack piece that was put out by Jesse's allies. And I think it wasn't.
Mr. Xiong,
An independent news source is not,
Yes.
these aren't my
Both
allies.
of you, I appreciate the conversation and wanting to continue the discussion. We are going to move on to the next section. We will have an option at the end to discuss further if there are further questions about this, but we do need to continue on with the event. So the next question, Sam, if you'd like to ask. We're going to move on to a policing section. Each candidate will have 1 minute each to answer each question. Please refrain from going outside. Thank you.
Thanks everyone. So the city of Berkeley has set a goal of cutting the BPD budget by 50%. What are your priorities in redirecting that general funding? What types of new projects / internal entities will you create? Which existing ones will you support or grow? Mr. Mayor, you are going first.
Thank you very much. Well, I support the creation of a Department of Transportation to move traffic stops and parking enforcement out of our police department and to have non-sworn personnel do routine traffic stops. We know far often the first interaction is with somebody pulling somebody over in a routine traffic stop, and we've seen those escalate, sadly, to people of color losing their life. I support a creation of a specialized care unit to expand our emergency mental health response, so our police are not the first people to respond when somebody's in a mental health crisis. I support investment in a ceasefire program and a violence prevention initiative to address the very troubling number of shootings and violent crime that we're seeing in Berkeley from a restorative justice lens. Our police department represents 44% of our city budget. That's not sustainable. And also policing isn't done in a way that reflects our community's values. So the process we're launching to reimagine public safety and these specific efforts to shift these functions out of the police department will ensure that we have non-sworn personnel that are responding and can address some of the racial disparities that we see.
Mr. Xiong, you're up next.
So let's talk about some of the things we won't do under administration if we win this campaign. We will not be using spit hoods, which have been described by Amnesty International as cruel and dangerous. We will not be sending our police to receive military training under Greg Ahern, a sheriff who's repeatedly and falsely accused Black men of crimes, who's retweeted white supremacists. What we will be doing is using some of that funding to fund the services we desperately need in the city. About 75% of police time is spent on homelessness. But police are not the right tool. That's not the right department to address homelessness and mental health crises. We need to fund mental health services. And our mobile crisis team is not even in operation 2 days of the week. If you're happening to have a mental health crisis on a Tuesday or Saturday, the mobile crisis team just isn't available to you. We have a $70 million police budget. If we cut that police budget in half, we could instantly house every single unhoused person in the city of Berkeley with that $35 million. So yes, we should be supporting the homeless. We should supporting mental health services, and we should support educational efforts too, because our public school system is facing very severe state budget cuts. Providing some of our teachers and families a little more support in a time where they desperately need it is an ethical priority.
And finally, Mix Hill.
Thank you. As mayor, I will continue to advocate to prohibit the Berkeley Police Department from collaborating with the Department of Homeland Security and the FBI. This will greatly reduce available funds for the police department and protect residents from ulterior national motives. Suspicion of terrorism, by the way, is a crime without bail, and the United States has banned people from communist countries from entering the country and is planning on ICE raids starting October 16th. I believe that we need to reallocate necessary funding to legal support, especially for undocumented people. I call for all police officers to be subject to background checks regarding domestic violence, excessive use of force, and hate group affiliation. The city also must remove all police units from residing near or within daycares and Berkeley schools. This will directly impact the funding for patrolling. And the movement to defund the police is a direct response to the corruption, unprovoked violence, and murder of people for existing. As Berkeley, as the first city created by August Wagner with the official police department, we owe a responsibility to all the communities throughout the United States, throughout the world, to make sure that police are held accountable. And as mayor, I will do just that with sensitivity, cultural and ethnicity training, as well as nonviolent tactical responses. Thank you.
Thank you all for your responses. So next question is Mayor Erguin. In an interview with UC Berkeley Alumni Magazine in 2018, you said, "First and foremost, my priority is to support our police department. I think there's been a conflation of national problems with policing in Berkeley. We are not Oakland, we are not Ferguson, we are not Baltimore, we are not Sacramento. Mayor Erguin and to Wayne and Aiden as well, can Berkeley residents who support transferring funding away from the police count on you to follow through on the goal council set?" And Mix Hill, you can start on this one if you'd like.
Yes, you can. I had an interesting conversation with someone from the Solano Avenue area today, and they were really worried about having police not being able to protect them if a climate disaster happened or if there was an emergency. And I told them, I'm not trying to stop police officers from utilizing safety protocols. But I do believe that police have a responsibility to the national world. And that's why I'm working towards focusing on Baltimore and Michigan, because they learned everything they know from Berkeley. Berkeley has the direct responsibility to make sure we're using non-excessive uses of force. Things that can apply to Berkeley, we can change the uniforms of police officers, make them like Great Britain, where it's yellow instead of black. We can stop them from using undercover patrols. We can make sure that police officers, starting with the sheriff, are held accountable for their statements. And that's why I support the November ballot for the Police Accountability Board, because at least then Berkeley will have the ability to bring police officers accused of excessive force to the table, making sure they're held accountable and making sure we're giving the resources to everyone that is involved, including the police. You can't say that I'm anti-police. I'm anti-irresponsible use of force, and that's why I'm running for mayor.
Thanks. Thank you. Mr. Shung, it's up to you now, if you'd like.
Yeah, you can absolutely count on us to reform the police. And unlike Jesse, we're not going to vote for Urban Shield. We're not going to defend the use of spit hoods. We're not going to advocate for more funding and then a couple of years later advocate for less funding when it's politically convenient. And there are two reasons for that. One, this is my lived experience. When I was a young assistant professor at Northwestern University, I was a law professor of all things. I had my first experience of police brutality myself. I was someone who grew up thinking police are great, can trust them to keep our neighborhood safe. And I was doing a simple demonstration on Michigan Avenue, the fancy shopper avenue in Chicago where all the rich people go and shop. I was protesting one of the stores. An off-duty cop who was hired as security by one of the shops grabbed me by the face and shoved my face in the concrete. Tore all my leaflets up, threw me in jail for the night. I got charged with my first felony. This is my first experience firsthand with police brutality, and I've had many since then. What we've seen across the nation is there's a reckoning about the fact that there's systemic abuses. It's not just about one-off instances of police violence. It's about a culture in the police force of violence. And this is why we can't train our police to use military tools and tactics. This is why we have to hold them accountable for the good of police, for the good of criminal justice, and of course, most importantly, for the good of the folks who are most victimized by police violence in our Black and brown communities.
Thank you, Mayor Erguin. You're up now.
So I just want to provide that quote some context. It was during the time when both UC Berkeley and the city of Berkeley were the focal point of violent neo-Nazis and right-wing extremists coming into our city to inflict violence on our residents and to destroy our businesses. And so I did say that we should support our police because they were on the front lines working to keep our community safe while we were standing up to hate. I have been a strong advocate for police accountability. I co-wrote Measure II, which is on the Berkeley ballot. I urge everyone to vote yes, vote II on II. This will create an independent police accountability board, which we so desperately need to have more civilian oversight of our police department. We launched a task force, which has come up with very thoughtful recommendations on addressing the issue of racial disparities in police stops, and look forward to advancing their work in the coming months. We recently updated our use of force policy to significantly limit use of force, including the types of control holds that killed George Floyd. And lastly, I cannot help but respond to the national movement for change. And that's why I do support the reforms the council has put forward.
Mr. Mayor. Next question is, Berkeley student Seth Smith was senselessly gunned down in June of this year. In 2012, Business Insider ranked UC Berkeley as the second most dangerous town for students based on violent and property crime rates. Many students, especially women, feel unsafe walking home from campus at night. How would you make Berkeley safer for students? And Mr. Shung, you'd like to start.
Yeah, we can look at these awful incidents that happen. And yeah, what happened to Seth is unacceptable. It's outrageous. And it's terrifying that these things are happening to more people. There have been, I think, at least a dozen shootings in South and West Berkeley in the last month. And we can look at them as isolated instances of violence, or we can look at the systemic pattern. And when you look at the systemic pattern, what you find is that what's really causing violence more than anything else isn't lack of policing. It's a lack of community services. The University of Chicago did a randomized controlled trial recently, finding that when you give disadvantaged youth good educational opportunities, it reduces their propensity for violent crime by 50%. 50%. There's another study done recently showing that when you improve public infrastructure and just add lighting to streets, and there's a lot of really dark places in Berkeley, it reduces violent crime rates by 36%. So if you just look at the violent crime in isolation and say we need more policing, you're missing the big picture, which is that there are all sorts of community services and infrastructure we're missing out on and not building properly, both socially and just physically in terms of infrastructure that will make our cities more safe. But yes, we also have to find the people who are committing acts of violence. And in very narrow circumstances, the police are the right tool to stop crime.
Thank you. Mr. Hill, if you'd like to go now.
First, I want to give my deepest condolences to Seth Smith's mother. It's a very difficult time, and as a student and knowing my mother worried about me here, I can only imagine your pain. To protect people that were dealing with gun violence or are dealing with gun violence, I support local efforts to reduce and combat these crimes by introducing and adopting extreme risk protection orders. These are red flag laws to bring the potentially life-saving tool to as many communities as possible. And I'm lucky enough to have worked with State Senator Nancy Skinner to make sure that people are prevented from using guns who have domestic violence incidences in our city. I also would consider ShotSpotter technology to identify sources of gunfire. Public safety agencies at every level have a role to play in preventing domestic and international acts of terrorism and violence, and we should share that intelligence with local authorities in a continuous, timely, and reciprocal manner. In my history, I have large experiences understanding small arms and lethal weapons, chemical agents, biological warfare, and I'm ready to defend our city against all of those things. And in my studies, I know disarmament, demilitarization, and demobilization. And that's how we can make sure people who are doing these crimes are taken off of our streets.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor Erguin, you're up next.
Well, my heart also goes out to the family and friends of Seth Smith. It's a tragic loss that should never have happened. And we are seeing an increase in gun violence in Berkeley. This is on par with what we're seeing throughout the region. alarmingly during this pandemic. Our police do think it's due to a small number of individuals, and there's active investigations happening while we are increasing the police presence in those areas where there's been a large number of shootings. Literally one block there have been shootings almost every weekend, which is just very troubling for those neighbors. So we do need to invest in a number of things. Crime prevention through environmental design. We do need to increase lighting. I was happy to work with the ASUC to expand lighting around campus. We need to expand lighting citywide. Lighting does help deter crime. I want to increase our patrols, but not just cars driving around Berkeley, but officers getting out there and walking beats, and cops on bikes, building relationships with neighbors and with businesses. We need to really invest in a community-involved policing focus and violence prevention. Richmond and Oakland have excellent models, such as the ceasefire program that we should be investing in Berkeley.
Thank you. So next we have an audience question also about policing. So it is, will you support the creation of a clear, binding accountability plan for the various proposed public safety changes and hold the council, the city manager, and the chief of police accountable to the public? Mayor Arreguín, if you'd like to go first.
Yes, absolutely. And, unfortunately, I voted for many reforms which have gone to the police department, and they've sat there, and to the point where I have to form a task force to move the conversation about racial profiling forward. So that's unacceptable. I actually think we need a new chief of police ultimately, and I hope that there'll be new leadership in the department. But fundamentally, we need accountability. We need timelines. We need to hold the city manager and the police department accountable for delivering on these issues. That's the job of the mayor and the city council. And I would support a clear accountability plan with clear timelines and metrics to ensure that these policies and these reforms happen. That's the only way it's going to happen. And I know that there's a lack of trust because of the department's delays and lack of commitment to reform, and we have to rebuild that trust.
Thank you. Mr. Shunk?
We can talk about accountability in theory, and we can ask what has happened in terms of accountability in practice over the last 10 years and last 5 years. And when you look at what's happened in the city council, I mean, just a moment ago, we were talking about fake allegations of racism on anonymous blogs. There's actual violent racism happening in the city of Berkeley Police Department that still has not been held accountable. And you look at cases like Kayla Moore. Kayla Moore was a woman, a Black woman who was killed on her own bed when she was having a mental health crisis. And to this day, the officer who killed her, who has not been held accountable, the city has not compensated the family even a dime. And I was talking to Maria Moore just a couple of days ago. And what she tells me is the city still is not even willing to have a legitimate conversation with her about the litigation that's commenced. If we don't hold our officers accountable, if we don't hold our city government officials accountable, when people die at police hands, we're not going to create change. And if you want to ask what sort of accountability we'll create in the future, let's just look at what sort of accountability we've had in the past. And what we'll see is we haven't done a good job in Berkeley.
Thank you. Mix Hill.
You can 100% expect accountability from me. When I ran for office in 2018, I made a position paper directly for the police department, and it was called Police Reform and Community First Alternatives. Luckily, every single aspect except for the lack of Homeland Security funding has been adopted by the police department as well. I've worked to get bad cops out of our city, including Officer Sean Arenas, who systemically targeted on his bicycle low-income people of color right next to UC Berkeley. And it's important to note that UC Berkeley police officers have a 1-mile jurisdiction against any of their properties. And so many people are getting double policed, and I've worked against that. As a homeless commissioner and as a candidate, I've worked to reduce urban shield. I've worked to reduce the surveillance mechanisms and facial recognition technologies that police had used in San Pablo Park. And then I worked to provide mental illness and neurodivergent communities to make sure that they have support from the police officers. I've also worked with police officers in many other circumstances, but it's important to note that I have a working relationship with them because I believe in the legal system and I work for the betterment of humanity. And that's what really is respectable. If you don't have those things, if you don't have respect, if you don't understand, it would be difficult. I think.
No worries. All right.
Thank you, everyone.
We are going to move on to we're going to be moving on to section 2, which is housing. So again, each candidate will have 1 minute each to answer every question. We will start off with the first question.
According to a 2017 study of Berkeley students, the average undergraduate student living in off-campus housing spent $1,252 a month on housing, and most shared a bedroom with 1 or 2 roommates. 27% of undergraduates, 26% of graduate students, 47% of postdocs, and 44% of student parents have considered leaving UC Berkeley because of their housing situation. Most students as dependents are ineligible for affordable housing units. How would you lower the cost of housing for students? Ms. Hill, you have the floor.
Thank you. As a student this year, I pay over $1,800 every month before the COVID crisis to stay in this apartment. And I'm lucky that I have my partner who's able to work with me to make sure that we pay our bills. It's not affordable. And I told the city council in 2018, affordable housing is not affordable for the vast majority of students. However, that was not received well and it wasn't allocated efficiently. So I've prioritized certain factors to make sure that people aren't housed. And that's producing, rehabilitating nonprofit and community-controlled housing programs through public financing, making sure that people have access to resident control over their units, and really taxing those out-of-city property managers like K&S Company from having a surplus of supplies and housing goods in our city while not paying the regular taxes. I will make sure that students are housed, and one of my big priorities is making sure University House, the unoccupied Chancellor's Mansion, becomes a student cooperative, specifically for sexual assault survivors. And these things were not taken seriously. And so with the power of mayor, I will make sure that my Black voice is heard and tell them specifically that we need systemic changes to the way that things are. If there is housing available and you are not housing students and residents alike, something desperately needs to change. And I hope to bring that change as your Berkeley Mayor-elect 2020.
Mayor Arreguín.
Well, first we got to repeal Costa-Hawkins. That law single-handedly has resulted in massive gouging of rents in the city of Berkeley and throughout the state of California. I strongly support Proposition 21 and urge you all to do so as well. Doesn't repeal it, but at least gives some reasonable reforms, such as phasing in new construction under rent control, because most new construction is not under rent control. So tenants could get a $1,000 or $2,000 a month increase and then end up on the street. So we need to reform the state laws that affect rent levels and preempt our local rent control laws. We need to protect rent control and expand tenant protections to keep people housed. And we need to build new housing, particularly housing close to campus. And during my mayorship, we passed the More Student Housing Now resolution, working with the ASUC and other student leaders. We initiated a process to rezone the Southside area to increase density close to campus. I support significantly more density around the campus by building more housing that will hopefully bring rents down. And as part of that, I think what we need to condition are affordable units for students as a condition of approval for that housing.
Or Mr. Shang.
So 3 things we need to do. One is we have to reduce the cost of building. Berkeley and the Bay Area are the most expensive place in the world to build. That increases the cost of housing. We have a 449-page monstrosity that we call a zoning ordinance. And in Berkeley, historically, sometimes it takes years to get approval for an accessory dwelling unit, when in cities like San Jose, they try and do it in 90 minutes. We got to streamline and simplify the process. Second, we need zoning reform. Unlike the current mayor, I don't believe zoning reform is a declaration of war against our neighborhoods. I think it's the only thing that's going to save our neighborhoods. The reality is, even if we reduce the cost of housing, if we're just not allowed to build because we're all single family zoned, it doesn't matter. California is 49th out of 50 states in the nation in terms of housing units per population. The Bay Area is the worst place in the state of California. We have 250 units per housing for every 1,000 people in this area. That's got to change. And the third thing is we got to tax the developers. The folks who have the most money are big corporations. The developers are making a killing. Unlike our current mayor, I'm not going to take money from developers. I'm going to tax developers. And this is one of the big differences between myself and the current mayor. If you believe that we should tax big corporations and developers more and give more support for folks like students and working class people, then you should vote for me.
Thank you all for your responses. Moving on to the next question. The university plans to construct thousands of campus housing units near campus, including the Gateway site, Upper Hurst, and possibly at Oxford Track or at People's Park. Do you support these projects? If not, how else would you propose alleviating the lack of student housing? Mr. Shum, you can start as well.
Yeah, I don't think it's as simple as support or oppose. I think everybody agrees, and I just talked about how we desperately need more housing. We need zoning reform. We need upzoning of transit corridors. Having said that, we have to do it in a way that is ethical. And a lot of these projects are projects where we're going to be displacing currently existing affordable housing when we don't have much affordable housing in the city already. We're going to be displacing people who are using a park and haven't given them a sufficient stake in the future. So I think the processes we use in deciding which developments to build for students have to be reformed. In particular, we have to take a more grassroots approach. Let's give the folks who actually have an interest most directly in these developments, the folks who are currently living in the places that will suffer from displacement, a real voice and real power over their futures. And we start doing that, not only will we be able to move forward faster, but the outcomes will be better too. Because when you talk to people on the front lines of a situation, this is what I learned as a social scientist. When you talk to people on the front lines of a situation, that's when you get the data you need to get the best result. And that's what we'll do from there.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor, if you'd take the floor from here.
Thank you. Well, just before I answer the question, we have some of the highest impact fees of any city in the Bay Area to fund affordable housing. We are holding developers accountable, making sure they contribute to community benefits. That's essential. I do not support tearing down 1931 Walnut in order to build the Gateway site. And I've been very vocally against that and working to lobby the chancellor to drop that as part of the plan for that project. We can build hundreds of beds of student housing there without tearing down existing rent-controlled affordable housing. It's unnecessary. But I do strongly support the campus's plans to build housing on all the 9 sites that have been put forward. There are issues we're gonna have to work out with each of those sites, such as People's Park and Oxford Track, but it's going to be critical to create the sufficient number of beds to address the current shortage, let alone the current need the campus has. UC Berkeley ranks lowest of any campus in the UC system for providing housing for students. And this is really essential to address the broader housing and affordability needs in our city.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mix Hill, you're up.
Thank you. I want to try to time it for 1 minute. So I actually was a part of the More Student Housing Now proposal at the Planning Commission, where I told them that it wasn't wise to develop on People's Park because it was the only green space for students on South Side for a disaster preparedness area. And this is primarily Martinez Commons, Unit 2. And something that's missing from this report is that the Enclave and the Panoramic have also been developed, increasing student housing. But now that you can see a crane on Bancroft Avenue with Urban Outfitters used to be, and we display small businesses off of Bancroft Avenue too, pushing students to utilize resources on campus rather than on Telegraph Avenue. The whole important point is that I work with the Oxford Tract and People's Park, and a report led by the Hispanic Access Foundation and Center for American Progress found that communities of color are almost 3 times more likely than white communities to live in nature-deprived areas. And that means they have no access to parks, paths, or green spaces. Instead, I would make sure that the quality of life is available for Berkeleyans. What is the point of having housing if you can't breathe when you go outside? Thank you.
Thank you all for your responses. Next question. In 2019, the Berkeley City Council passed a referral to study zoning changes to create more missing middle housing. Jurisdictions around the country, like Minneapolis and the state of Oregon, have ended single-family zoning. Do you support legalizing duplexes, triplexes, and quadruplexes all over the city? If not, how do you plan to increase affordable housing affordability for older Berkeley students, student parents, and postdocs? Mr. Mayor Arreguín, you can start first.
Yes, strongly. And look forward to working, if I'm reelected, to move not only the study forward, but zoning reform forward. I was actually a critical vote in moving that legislation forward. There was actually a recent podcast that KQED had released that talked about the origins of single-family zoning in the city of Berkeley, and I encourage everyone to listen to it. And single-family zoning was started in 1916 in the Elmwood district to prevent a dance hall that predominantly African Americans would use from being located in the Elmwood. And so they zoned it exclusively for single-family. That's the foundation in which our zoning is built in the city. and it has excluded people of color. In addition to the redlining policies, zoning has excluded people of color and people of all income levels to live in our city. So we have to address this. If we believe in racial equity, if we believe in addressing systemic racism, we have to address the issues of systemic racism that exist in our housing policies. And so I also think we have to do this to meet our new RENA targets anyways. And the only way we're going to have sufficient housing is if we look at every aspect of our city, from the hills to the flats.
Thank you. Mixel, you're up.
I believe in resident ownership of development policies, and that means however the community wants to proceed, I will support them and try to find the most equitable solution. And I think that's what you should look for in a mayor, someone who wants equity for the people that they're governing. I support pathways to homeownership overall, and I would develop public-public partnerships to create public housing units to allow residential ownership for the available life of the unit. I want to increase and have a significant number of affordable and low-income housing units into urbanized areas, addressing the needs of all of our citizens. We can retrofit our existing buildings for energy conservation, preventing excess utility taxes, and making sure that there's low-impact transportation systems. All of these things are interconnected, and I would strengthen and enforce fair housing laws against discrimination based on race, sex, familial status, marital status, disability, and sexual orientation. We see the decrease of Berkeley tenants not being able to use Section 8 vouchers. I want to make sure that whatever resources people have at their disposal, it works towards their betterment and it works towards their housing security for the long term, not just the short term. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Shaw?
So when you think about which candidate is going to support zoning reform, again, I think it's really instructive and important for us to look at not just what's being said at this debate, what's being placed on a piece of paper, but somebody's record. And when you look at kind of Jesse's record, the reality is just a couple of years ago, Jesse was calling zoning reform a declaration of war against Berkeley. Right? Nancy Skinner had a bill that would upzone transit corridors, would not only have generated thousands of units of affordable housing in Berkeley, would have helped us fight the climate crisis. And Jesse was aligning himself with wealthy folks who didn't want more density in their neighborhoods. And let me be clear about this. I have always been a proponent of zoning reform. I've always been a proponent of accelerating the process of developing more affordable housing. I think there are ways for us to do that that will not harm the grandmother who needs a parking space outside her front yard. I think that's a legitimate interest we should be concerned with. What I'm not particularly sympathetic to is the wealthy folks in the hills who just don't want poor people in their neighborhoods. That's not okay. That's something we'll fight. I will not cater to it the way Mayor Arreguín has catered to it. You can count on me to fight hard to ensure our city is a city that working class people can actually afford to live in. Thank you.
Next, we have an audience question. So as a UC, from the audience member, as a UC Berkeley student and sitting member of the board of directors of the Berkeley Student Cooperative, how will your policies support the student co-ops and the cooperative movement at large for the city of Berkeley? Mix Hill, would you like to go first?
Yes, I am a former resident of the student co-ops, Oscar Wilde House. And so my housing platform is based off of that model, making sure that people have communities in favor of successful life. And students especially are susceptible to not having that quality of life that student co-ops provide. Student co-ops provide food, they provide adequate housing, they provide mental health care. These are all things that I've seen and supported in the student co-op movement. And I want to mention currently right now, I have working relationships without power, without the mayor's office, to work with both Coin Court and Casa Zimbabwe to make sure that people are fed. We serve East Bay Food Not Bombs on Fridays and Saturdays now, and this is all student-led. And so I would definitely support the student cooperatives. I support their mission in making sure that all affordable housing is available for Berkeley. And I want to have so much more for us to make sure that people can live in a safe environment for them, make sure that they have the resources necessary, and really give them the option to find a home that makes them feel good about themselves. Thank you.
Thank you, Mix Hill. Mayor Arreguín.
Well, first I have to respond to something that Mr. Shung had said. Once again, he cherry picks facts, does not provide context about statements and votes. The reason I did not initially support that bill is because the bill did not have adequate protections against displacement of tenants. So I do believe we need zoning reform, but not by pushing existing tenants and people of color out of their homes. We need to have that balance. Ultimately, the legislation did strike that balance, and I was more supportive of it. I also think the homeless crisis, rising homelessness, does necessitate that we evolve our views on these issues. And my votes and my statements and my positions as a leader in Berkeley and regionally demonstrate my support for housing. On the question, UC should give land to the co-ops, first and foremost. We should be looking at one of those 9 sites to be a site where we can build affordable cooperative housing. I support the use of Measure U1, our landlord tax, and Measure O, our bond, affordable housing bond, funding to support the acquisition of buildings to expand cooperative housing, as well as building new student affordable housing.
Thank you, Mr. Shang.
Yeah, it's funny that you say that, Jesse, because the people who are supporting your campaign, the people who supported you when you said that about zoning reform, are not the low-income folks in South and West Berkeley. They're all supporting me, right? The folks who are supporting you are people who are millionaires in North Berkeley. And so I just disagree. And if you look back at the statements you made, it had very little to do with displacement, had a lot to do with protecting wealthy enclaves from more density. So on the question of social housing, our platform is 100% supportive of making everyone a stakeholder in our society. If you look at the model of housing that works best around the entire world, it's Vienna, Austria. Housing economists who look at the situation say, this is amazing. You got average rents of like $1,200 a month. And the way it came about is 62% of the housing is publicly owned. And they're neighborhood councils that have real control over the housing development in their own neighborhoods. When you make people stakeholders in their own future, it turns out they make pretty damn good decisions. So what we'd like to do is let's have more of this sort of housing, not just in an individual co-op here and there. Let's try and expand this model. Let's systematize this model across the city so people have a real stake, an ownership stake in where they live. We have an ownership and stakeholder society, and more importantly, a voice in the development of the future. And if we do those 2 things, we're going to get a lot better housing outcomes in Berkeley.
Thank you. Thank you all for those answers. This is actually a direct question from the audience to Mayor Erguin. If you believe that we need to fix the zoning laws to be more racially equitable, sorry, 1 second.
Oh, sorry, I accidentally clicked that away.
No worries.
But the gist of the question is, Mayor Erguin, if regarding your statement about making the zoning laws in Berkeley more racially equitable, what have you done in your previous term to follow through on that goal?
Well, first of all, I'm not just supported by people in the Hills, I'm supported by people throughout the entire city. Every single endorsement, every single organization that's endorsed in this race, including the Sierra Club, the Democratic Party, have endorsed my campaign, not Mr. Shung's. I've been supported by Berkeley Neighbors for Housing and Climate Action, an actual coalition of pro-housing activists in the city of Berkeley, who support me because of my record of advocating for housing, not just in Berkeley, but regionally. Several things. One, as president of ABAG, I'm leading the development of the regional housing needs allocation. We actually have a vote this Thursday, which is going to make sure that Santa Clara County cities and communities that have not built enough housing will have to meet more responsibility to build housing to address our regional housing crisis. I've supported the missing middle study. We're doing a major update of our zoning ordinance to streamline it. I've supported proposals to streamline the permitting process for affordable housing and other projects. I've supported state legislation, but we need to fundamentally look at changing our zoning code in our residential districts. We've voted for the missing middle study. We're going to launch that process and hopefully move that forward the next year.
All right, thank you, Mr. Mayor. One more question, just very quickly before we end this section. All of you are pushing for progressive policies. It's a major question for the most vulnerable groups in Berkeley about, your commitment to following through with those policies. How do you plan to deal with right-wing and institutional backlash that comes with passing highly progressive policies? Obviously, in the past few years, right-wing groups have come to Berkeley in the past. Mayor Erguin.
Trying to kind of, there's multiple questions within that one question, but
yeah, absolutely.
But what I would say is that, we talk about homelessness, we talk about housing, while our community is very supportive of addressing these issues, when when it comes time to locate a homeless shelter in a neighborhood, we see a significant backlash. And so what we need to do is not just engage those neighbors, but we need to stand up to them when they're wrong, and when doing the right thing is uncomfortable and will have an impact. And so, my entire life, I've been an advocate for economic and social and racial justice. My 16 years of public service in the Berkeley community, I've been a fighter for working families. That's why labor supports me. I've been a fighter for affordable housing. I've been a fighter for social justice, standing up to the Trump administration, protecting our immigrant communities. And I think now more than ever, with the right-wing hate happening in our country, with the divisive president, that we have to stand firm for these Berkeley values and take steps in the Berkeley community to protect our Muslim brothers and sisters, our immigrants, and everyone from this divisive rhetoric.
Thank you, Mr. Shang.
I would first challenge the assumption, because I think if you look at the record of Mayor Arreguín, it's not that progressive. Penalizing homeless people is not progressive. Sending police to receive military training or using spit hoods, that's not progressive. Taking corporate PAC money is not progressive. So I think there is a key difference between myself and the mayor, and frankly, between Aiden and the mayor, in terms of how progressive our policies are. But the question is a good one. Notwithstanding whether our policies are progressive or not, there are people conservative in Berkeley, and there are people conservative in this country that we have to work together with if we're going to address problems like climate change. And I say, let's look at the research and how you do it. And you look at Rob Willer, who's got an amazing TED Talk about how to have better political conversations. He's a friend of mine. I talk to him every couple months about how to have more effective political conversations. And we can come together as a nation to address problems like climate change as long as we focus on shared values, right? So for example, when you're talking to a right-wing person about climate change, you don't talk about climate justice and Standing Rock and civil disobedience. You don't tell them stories about getting arrested, although I've been arrested a bunch of times. You talk about how we want to have a cleaner environment. And it turns out when you frame policies that are progressive to conservatives in terms of their values, you can win them over. And that's exactly what we're going to do when we win this election.
Thank you. Mix Hill. I think you're muted.
Yeah, I was muted. So I just want to say very briefly, with my colleagues attacking each other, it's a very bad sign for the city of Berkeley. What you don't understand is I exist too, and Berkeley is watching. These ad hominem attacks are not good for anybody. With that said, how I would make sure that there's no right-wing or conservative backlash is really providing for basic needs and making inclusionary policies that affect all of us. My campaign slogan is a Berkeley for all of us, not just some, not just a few people, but every single person here. And that starts with political integrity. I will defend freedom of speech, privacy, innovation, and consumer rights in an increasingly digitized world. I would make sure that we prohibit the use of phrases such as state of emergency as a sufficient reason to make any government action, budget, or plan a secret. And I believe in the freedom of information. I think it's in the public interest for voters to be well informed. I'll propose legislation adopting requirements that free television and radio time be dedicated to candidates, and I will make sure that election debates and forums and free media vouchers are working against spending limits. We have to have equal time for every single person here. And I want to make sure Berkeleyans feel like they have the transparency and the accountability to make an educated decision. And so that's why I urge every Berkeleyan to vote me, Aiden Hill, as rank number 1 or 2 for Berkeley Mayor. And I will provide these things for you.
Thank you, Mix Hill.
Thank you, y'all. We're going to go on to the last section, which is kind of our around the town. So again, each candidate will have 1 minute to answer each question each. So first question up is California's previous reopening of the economy led to a summer spike in coronavirus cases. Since reopening is still largely municipality and county directed, how will you make sure moving forward in reopening will be safe for the entire community? Mr. Shung, you can start.
Yeah, I've said from day one, when shelter in place came into effect, that these decisions should be made by a medical and scientific board working regionally, even across state lines, right? And so I will push for that. And at minimum, we should do this in Alameda County, but ideally we do this across state lines too, because what happens in Oregon and Washington affects us in California too. The second thing I'd say though, is we absolutely have to create stronger social norms. I don't believe in punitive approaches to creating safety, whether it's safety on the streets from crime or safety from COVID. And when we've done that across the nation, or frankly, across the world, it hasn't worked too well. What we can do is create very strong social norms. So as mayor, you can expect me and the other folks on our staff and in city leadership to try and set good examples in terms of social distancing, in terms of wearing face masks, and so on, to ensure that we maintain our position in the nation as one of the leading cities and regions on stopping COVID transmission.
Thank you. Mayor Arreguín?
Well, we are one of the leading cities and nations in controlling COVID-19. I'm proud of the work that we've done. The fact that we issued a shelter-in-place order in mid-March, along with other counties in the Bay Area, helped control the spread of COVID-19 and led to California and other states adopting shelter-in-place orders to limit the spread of this deadly virus. The work we're doing to expand testing, particularly to vulnerable populations, expanding contact tracing, supporting our unhoused community. I'm proud of the work that we've done, and we know that there's more that we have to do. We have to stay vigilant, first and foremost. I want to recognize that students living in congregate living situations are most at risk of contracting and spreading COVID-19. I also want to acknowledge that we've seen a fair number of parties and events where students have congregated, and we've seen spikes in cases, and we need to be vigilant. We need to follow the public health guidance because it's critical to protecting our community. And just like I was proud in 2017, when our community came together and stood united against hate, which led to a nationwide movement of cities adopting this United Against Hate campaign, going back to the last question, I'm proud of the work that we've done to control the spread of COVID-19, and there's more to do.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mix Hill?
Thank you for this question. COVID-19 has been very destructive for the vast majority of people in Berkeley. Students, residents, elders, workers, all alike are facing increasing challenges to our public health crisis. So what I would do to make sure Berkeleyans are protected, for example, is to provide elders with access to no-cost medical care, prescription medications, and durable medical equipment until universal health care for all persons is enacted. I'd make sure that we provide financial assistance for elders to guarantee an adequate income, advocate for free, quality, multilingual, and multicultural medical and home health care. According to Berkeley side, roughly 56% of responding Berkeleyans found mental health the most important issue facing our city. Research in healing and belonging grants for more mental health care support, recognizing that violence is a public health concern affecting long-term and generational psyche, and these are the things that we really need to focus on. I have to support medical and supportive services by creating a disability benefit and service outreach and case management program designed to assist disabled people accessing needed medical and psychiatric care. These are only some of the things I would provide to Berkeley if elected. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, next question up is 60% of Berkeley's carbon emissions come from cars and other transportation. How would you reduce carbon emissions in transportation if you were elected? Mr. Mayor, you can start first.
Thank you. Well, by building more housing along transit corridors and near our BART stations, and I'm proud to have led the effort to look at building up to 1,400 units of new housing at the Ashby and North Berkeley station, but also by getting people out of their cars and investing in electrification of our transportation systems. So we need to expand transit. I want to look at creating a shuttle system to connect parts of Berkeley that are not well served by transit. We need to invest in micromobility for those first and last mile trips, as well as promoting electric transportation. So we need more EV infrastructure. We need to promote more electric vehicles, electric buses. The governor has made the governor who has endorsed my candidacy, made an ambitious goal of ending the sale of fossil fuel vehicles in Berkeley or in the state by 2035. There's similar legislation from our environmental commission to adopt goals in Berkeley, and I support that. So we need to accelerate our efforts to make our streets safer for bicyclists, pedestrians by protected bike lanes and pedestrian infrastructure, and investing in electrification of our transportation system.
Thank you. Mix Hill, you're up.
Thank you. Inclusive design. Budget accessible transportation, including special accommodations for elders, people in wheelchairs, walkers, and other assistive devices. I support intergenerational volunteer opportunities, and that includes ride sharing. And I would direct the city manager to enact long walk signals at pedestrian crossings, more stop signs at intersections, and construction and maintenance of sidewalks and their entireties. Within urban design, we have the opportunity to reduce air pollutants and that threaten public health and curb transportation emissions that fuel climate change. I want to de-emphasize the planning of urban and regional environment based on principles of sound ecosystem management in favor of municipal ones. We can have traffic circles, which make streets and neighborhoods safer, public transportation for visitors, easily accessible through the ADA Act, and bicycle safety that provides free and community service bicyclists for tourist visitors and others without bicycles, so they can ride around town pollution-free. These are only a few of the things I would enact as mayor, and I hope to get your vote in this 2020 election. Thank you.
Mr. Shunk.
Yeah, so one thing to note about this question is, well, that 60% figure is a little bit misleading because it's a production-based figure. While if you look at a consumption-based inventory of greenhouse gas emissions instead of a production-based inventory, transit actually decreases considerably and food and agriculture increases considerably. So the actual impact of transit is more like 30%, not 60%, just at least from a perspective of consumption, which is the right perspective when we're looking at Berkeley's contribution to greenhouse gases. But nonetheless, transit's still big. It's still 1/3 of greenhouse gas emissions. It's the #1 most significant contributor to greenhouse gas emissions. And there are a lot of big, ambitious things we could do in the long term to transition our public infrastructure and our method of transit. We should have segregated bike lanes. We should have an electric shuttle. Well, honestly, on the time scale that we have to act on climate change, we just have to electrify everything. That has to be a huge part of the solution, because the reality is people like their cars, they like their shuttles, they like their Teslas, and we have to transition every single car in the city of Berkeley to an electric car. You know, Jesse talked about the endorsement of Gavin Newsom. I talked to solar engineers. This is what I've been doing for the last 20 years of my life. I was an environmental law professor. I geek out with the people who are trying to figure out the engineering details of how we can transition our energy and transit infrastructure toward the green energy economy. And we have to have electric cars on every road. We can do it for about $20,000 per household.
Thank you. So this is a question that is near and dear to my heart. Berkeley city government meetings often attract many of the city's older residents. City council meetings can be an intimidating venue for students. How would you encourage more students and other young people to participate in city government? How would you reach out to hear the perspective of Berkeley residents who are less likely to attend city council meetings? Mr. Shung.
Well, let's bring city council meetings in the 21st century. Let's put it on TikTok and Instagram. You know, I mean, if you look at the Berkeley City Council or the city website, it looks like it was built in 1992. It looks like, I mean, most of you probably don't even remember GeoCities. Do we? Do any of you even remember? Jesse remembers GeoCities, maybe. Jesse's a little bit younger than me. Do you remember GeoCities? I mean, and I know we're working on this, but this should have happened 10 years ago. But all the infrastructure we use for communication in the city of Berkeley has to be upgraded to use the tools of communication of the 21st century. But I also think we should streamline the processes. I mean, so for example, we have public comment periods that everyone finds extremely long. And frankly, even the people who are public commenting, you know, they've got to wait hours to get a public comment in on some agenda item that's 39th out of 47 agenda items. So we got to find ways for people to engage that don't require them to spend 6-7 hours sitting in a city council meeting. Maybe that means creating new digital infrastructure for comment. Maybe that means streamlining comments and having people join up into groups and small groups and share the mic when they have a shared comment that's going to be redundant to the other people's comments. There are a lot of innovations we can do procedurally, but honestly, the most important thing is let's just upgrade the tech.
Thank you. Mix Hill.
Thank you for this question. I agree that we need technological advancement. Some specific policies I would enact is support local efforts to pilot and test new technologies, especially in transportation, giving communities the opportunity to evaluate and deploy these systems free from federal preemption. And I believe full-heartedly that we need to protect our election system and other vital technology assets in local governance with financial and technical support. Transparency-wise, I believe in a wide span of programming and information for genuine citizen access that collaborates on the diversity of viewpoints and respect for the local community interests, public affairs, and quality children's programming. I support that censorship of opinion editorials editorials, opinion pieces and advertisements and other messages are inappropriate. And I support the establishment of cooperative public newspapers and magazines whose purpose is to inform their readership. Public schools should address media literacy in their curriculum, and I support community organizing towards public airwave broadcasting. Some things that you can do is support Berkeley-owned community radios, allowing for news services of small FM stations, and I would do so much more if elected as Berkeley Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, Mix Hill. Mayor Aragon.
Well, this is an area that I've done a lot of work in my time in office, in addition to trying to improve the collaboration and civility on the council. You'll be happy to know, Wayne, that we are doing a major update of our city website. I agree that it's 20th century technology. Up until when I was at the council, we weren't even on social media. And so unfortunately, our city is really antiquated in embracing technology as a means of communication, as well as delivering services. I think we can do a better job of delivering permits and parking permits and accessing services. Some of those innovations we did start in response to COVID, but COVID's really forced the city to have to move quickly to transform the way that we deliver services using technology. Zoom is great. This platform has enabled more people to participate without having to sit in a city council meeting. I want to see how we can use Zoom, how we can use Twitter, how we can use other modes of technology to allow broader participation in our meetings. I have initiated and will continue to have town hall meetings throughout the city to get input on important issues, looking at having special meetings on more controversial issues. And I'll stop there. There's more that we can do.
All right, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Another question that was submitted in advance of this event by a student. With students losing internships or jobs due to the COVID-19 pandemic, what will you do to provide or continue services for students that are free or low cost, such as low cost food programs or support for housing? Mix Hill.
Yes, this is a great question. I believe wholeheartedly that we need a social safety nets that includes housing, food security, and community action. And that's why I support budget allocations to reflect such. I've talked in depth about providing healthcare services for our city. I believe in the right of energy, in which we work with municipal utilities companies to provide that easy access through solar technologies. Cooling and heating, for example, can be weatherized for buildings. And I really want to make sure that people have the right to access these materials. Not only do we need rent support, but we need resident ownership of their policies and making sure those residents feel like they can go to the appropriate commissions to talk about the needs that would increase their utilities in life. I support green incentives, which would be tax incentives, credits, and low interest loans to small businesses who voluntarily incorporate green chemistry in the production of their systems. This would incorporate safety and the lack of workplace hazards that students need to make sure that they develop primarily economically, socially, and culturally. And I would do so much more. I wish I had the time to say it, but you can expect all of these things with a vote for me as Mayor of Berkeley.
All right, thank you. Mayor Aragon.
Well, my focus in this COVID emergency has been to provide that safety net for our community. And we know that we're going to be dealing with COVID for many more months. And then what happens after the state of emergency is lifted, when tenants are going to have significant rent debt and facing increasing pressure of housing insecurity, when people need to find jobs and get back to work. And so the economic recovery is going to have to be just as important as the work we're doing to control the spread of COVID-19. And that's an area where I'm deeply committed. That is one of my platform priorities, is fighting COVID and a just and equitable economic recovery. We've done a lot of great work with our nonprofit partners in our churches to expand food programs, and we need to sustain that. We need to I support guaranteed income as a way to provide monetary assistance for people who need funding for basic needs or housing support. We need to expand the housing retention program, the fund that we created to provide one-time housing assistance so people don't fall back on their rent. We put about $2 million in that fund. We're going to have to put more in. All those things are really essential, while also getting people back to work has got to be a critical piece of it as well.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Xiang.
Let's just set out some facts, because the facts are absolutely terrifying. 1 in 2 Americans under the age of 45 has either lost their jobs or had their hours cut. 1 in 6 children in America are facing food insecurity and hunger. And at the same time, we've seen tech companies increase their stock market valuation by the hundreds of billions of dollars. Amazon alone has $700 billion more in market capitalization over the last 6 months. So when you have those very simple facts, you've got young people and children, literally in some cases starving, and tech companies exploding and making hundreds of billions of dollars, the solution should be pretty transparent. Let's tax the hell out of the tech companies and give it to the folks who need it most. Unfortunately, our political structures are being controlled by those same tech companies. And for the record, Berkeley side, the publication that's attacking us, funded by tech companies. Jesse Arreguín, the mayor who's attacking us, has a lot of money from developers, corporate PACs, and other big corporations that have a lot of money to lose if our campaign wins and starts taxing the rich much more. But if we are going to support students, the unhoused, the working class folks who are suffering, it starts and ends with taxation. We've got to tax the rich.
Thank you, Mr. Shung. All right, well, I know that we're getting close to our end. We've had a lot of questions submitted to us, so I want to make sure that we try to get to as many as we can. So we do have one more question within the kind of this hodgepodge section. So do you support the Telegraph Shared Streets project? Do you support closing Telegraph Avenue near campus to cars? What's your vision for South Side? So we're going to give you guys 30 seconds instead of 1 minute, just because we are close on time. We can start with Mayor Arreguín.
Passionately support it. I was a co-sponsor of the proposal. This was in our Southside plan. I support closing other streets in Berkeley. What we've done in this COVID emergency with parklets and closing streets, we should make permanent.
Awesome. Nick Hill?
Thank you for this. I live in Telegraph Avenue, and so since 2018, I've been advocating for closed streets. I believe we need to bring a utility line transportation system between Bancroft Avenue and Dwight. That means really working on making sure that public transportation between those 4 streets is possible. Likewise, I don't know if closing off Durant Avenue is going to work in the short term, because that's where all the businesses are, and gig workers especially use that lane to make sure that food is delivered. And so I want to make sure that it's equitable, it encapsulates all of the different interests in our city, and make sure that students feel safe, especially walking in Berkeley. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Chung?
Yes, I support it, but let's go further and make the entire district carbon neutral.
Thank you. Another rapid fire question. Again, this section's called Around Town. This one's more of a personal question. Where's your favorite place to eat in Berkeley? Mix Hill, would you like to go first?
Don't do this to me. Okay.
Sorry to put you on the spot.
It's okay. I love El Patillo. I have such a great relationship with them. They're in San Pablo Avenue. If you're talking about the other districts, Zachary's Pizza and Solano Avenue, I mean, I have so many places. And in Telegraph Avenue, I love Bancho Ramen. And so I have recommendations in every single district in Berkeley, and feel free to reach out to me if you want to know more. Thank you.
All right, how about you, Mr. Shung?
Hands down, Dupi Palace. Get a spinach dosa. That place is amazing. On University, right next to Trader Joe's.
Mayor Arreguín.
Well, I would have to say Long Branch on San Pablo. I'm always checking out new restaurants in Berkeley. And I just want to encourage everyone, do support your local restaurants. Order out. Some restaurants are doing outdoor dining. They need your help. They need your support to get through this emergency.
All right, thank you. Unfortunately, that brings us to the end of our time tonight. I know you all have busy schedules, and I'd like to let you go. But once again, I'd like to thank all of you, Mix Hill, Mayor Arreguín, and Mr. Shung, for attending tonight. I think the relationship between the University of California, Berkeley students at that university and the city of Berkeley is really the centerpiece of the city of Berkeley, and we're excited to improve that relationship and work together in the future with whichever one of you is elected Mayor of Berkeley. Thank you.
Yeah, and for those who would like to share, this will also be up on our Facebook page, as again, it was live streamed. So that will be posted and live to more audiences, as not everyone can make an evening on a Monday. So again, thank you all for coming. It's always good to have a student lens in local elections, as local politics are really important. So everyone have a good evening. See you later.
Thank you. Have a great evening. Bye.
Mhm.